A very good afternoon, viewers. It is my humble honor this afternoon to welcome Professor Deborshi Borat, who happens to be the current Assistant Professor of OP Jindal Global University, Sonipat, Haryana. So, just to give you a brief background on Deborshi's qualifications, so prior to joining OP Jindal University as Assistant Professor, Deborshi did his Bachelor's of Law from NUGS Calcutta, which happens to be one of the top NLU colleges amongst CLAT universities. And subsequently, after finishing his LLB, he enrolled for his Masters of Law from none other than the Harvard University in his course of specialization in international law. And currently, Deborshi also dons multiple hats. Apart from being assistant professor in OP Jindal University, he is defending his doctoral thesis in PhD in law from Tufts University. So Deborshi not only dons multiple hats, but he also has a practical experience inside of law, where he has worked for a couple of law firms, namely Aquilaw and SNR Associates. So on this note, I welcome Professor Deborshi Borat to this latest edition of Logically Speaking, episode 4, and wherein I intend to have healthy and a fruitful discussion with Professor Deborshi on the regime of the current international investment law and what opportunities or challenges it poses for young students and legal practitioners like me. So on this note, Deborshi, the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Yeah, hi.
Hi,
Good
sir.
afternoon.
Hi,
I'm
sir.
so sorry about the delay. There was obviously some technical glitches.
Exactly, no problem, sir. To start off with this interview, I just wanted to give you a brief background or an overview on what presupposes or what forms the tenets or the notions of international investment law, because this field, as of now, it's still not that mature enough in India, and there are few practitioners alike, and so I just wanted to throw a light on the brief background on what international investment law is.
So, Aman, as you know very well yourself, because you've studied and engaged with this topic in granular detail much more than other law students would. Mm-hmm. So, the subject matter, although the classical viewpoint is that, okay, it has its roots in public international law and customary international law in particular, but obviously treaties are what basically provides the superstructure. Mm-hmm. And to that extent, we have to look at the treaties. Of course, the discussion which is ongoing right now is that if we migrate to a regime whereby there's a permanent investment court, and what the structure will look like under the auspice of such a separate dispute resolution structure, mm-hmm. We'll have to see. Maybe there'll be other international instruments. Now, you've come back from Europe, right? So in Europe, this topic is obviously being engaged with in much fuller detail. As I've spoken to a lot of other, students, faculty members, practitioners who are engaged with this topic, similar to your and my profile, and they seem to say the same thing, that at least those who are returning from Europe say that, okay, it's a huge thing after data and privacy. Mm-hmm. This is the big thing after GDPR. This is what everyone is talking about in Europe. I, of course, did my master's and then pursuing my PhD in the US. Mm-hmm. And my main advisor of my PhD committee has been an arbitrator in these ICSID tribunals, and he's on the roster. Sometimes he serves because he's more or less an academic practitioner, so he's not practicing as such. He's not part of any law firm, so he serves as a president of a lot of these ICSID tribunals in many cases. So I'm very familiar with his viewpoint. Of course, some of it is stemming from ideology, but I think that's what Aman, that you and I are talking about, that investment law is basically at a crossroads right now. Exactly. And what investment law is has or was a subject matter of some debate before. Mm-hmm. Now it seems that there has been a treatification of the investment law regime, and now a lot of the first generation treaties are being retired. A lot of treaties have been terminated. A lot of countries have withdrawn from the ICSID convention. They try to renegotiate their treaties. They're trying to put in new generations of treaties where ISDS, Investor State Dispute Settlement, which is what I'm looking at in particular during my PhD, is trying to be, completely avoided in favor of what is the next big step, I think, in the body. So so more on that.
So sir, just a layman's point of view, since just let's just omit me and you from the picture of international investment law, and just bring in a layman or a lawyer who is just into practice and who knows the basic notions of what commercial arbitration is. So what would be your answer to such lawyers who comes up to you and asks you, sir, what are the kind of disputes which are adjudicated in international investment regime?
Right. So international commercial arbitration is a time-tested dispute resolution procedure, as most lawyers who are dabbling with arbitration would know. Now, with international commercial arbitration, what typically happens is two big MNCs, private basically corporations, perhaps with global operations, are having a dispute pursuant to an arbitration clause in the agreements that they have signed with each other, whatever the commercial arrangement between them is, and they're trying to arbitrate, usually, or in more sophisticated environments, in an international forum with neutral arbitrators appointed by either of the parties, where party autonomy is king, right? Now what happens is, in the investment regime, it's different because it's an investor. It is an individual or one single corporation which has the power to sue a sovereign state. So that is why we call it ISDS, Investor-State Dispute Settlement. And it was a revolutionary innovation under international law when it was first introduced, and some scholars suggest that this is unprecedented powers. Under no other body of international law does one individual entity have so much power to sue sovereign states. Exactly. And arbitrators are basically sitting in judgment over the sovereign regulatory prerogative. Now, this has also been, the beginning of problems, which is why it has given rise to a legitimacy crisis, where global publics and countries and governments have staged a backlash, saying that, okay, listen, we are a state, we have to act in public interest, we have to regulate our economy, our socio-economic policies. Who are private arbitrators, whatever may be their credentials, to tell us what to do and what not to do and how to scale down? So in terms of your question, Aman, when as practitioners, now if you're interested in arbitration, of course, international commercial arbitration per se, even domestic commercial arbitration, is obviously up for grabs. Like the Arbitration Conciliation Act of 1996 in India has also been amended. Now there's talk, and it's already been implemented. I was talking to a lawyer affiliated with the Calcutta High Court recently, and he said that these domestic arbitration centers are already coming to fruition in various forms and dimensions. Obviously, this can only get scaled up. So there are a plethora of options, emerging in India itself. Now, the other thing what lawyers are trying to do and students are trying to do interested in arbitration is they're trying to look for internships in the arbitral centers and institutions, maybe in Singapore, maybe in Europe, maybe in Stockholm, maybe in London Chamber of Commerce, whatever, right? And then you start working there. And basically what happens is arbitration does not mean that, you completely get away from adjudication per se. It is not traditional litigation. But there are still lawyers who are arguing, making similar arguments as done in courts. And the arbitrators are basically replacing judges. So you're not going away from, the typical argumentative styles that we are used to in common law jurisdictions. You're just moving the setting, the venue, and basically the technology of argument to a different dimension. So that is all. And with investor-state arbitration, the unique dynamics unfortunately provide an ecosystem which is not very robustly followed in India. So if you're an Indian law student and you want to get into investor-state arbitration, unless you're affiliated with some governmental entity or with some entity with which the government has had a prior historical relationship with in terms of representation in these dispute resolution fora, there is very limited chance to pursue such a career in India meaningfully if you want to be a practitioner.
Exactly. Yeah. Rightly said, so. Stemming from your question, sir, I know I'm not supposed to enter into the substantive questions of the international investment, because this interview is about the basic notions of what IIL is. But then there's one question which is born in my mind, is where the basic lawyers or the legal practitioners know for a fact that an arbitration is only per se existent because of an arbitration agreement, and that is inside a contractual a contract between the parties. And so to say that even if with or without the existence of a contract, the arbitration agreement exists. So what would be your answer to such legal practitioners who questions that since commercial arbitration stems from a contractual dispute where an arbitration clause is there, so what is international investment law? Where is international investment law born? Is it only per se in the bilateral investment treaties of a country, or sometimes it's also through a contractual dispute between the parties?
Right. So there are two things here. So there are different levels in which investment law works, right? It can be contract based, it can be the national legal framework based, and it can be international law, right? So contractual disputes may also come into play. Now what happens is, and the other way to look at it is that the main forum for resolving international investment disputes stem from treaties. Now, whether they are bilateral treaties or mega regional treaties or even plurilateral treaties, supranational treaties, that a group of countries that maybe a regional trading bloc signs with each other, and there will be dispute resolution clauses there. So it can stem from there. Now the thing is, how does arbitration come in? Like, arbitration is very simply coming in private commercial disputes because there's an arbitration clause, like you rightly said, Aman. Now here what happens is there is an offer to arbitrate given by both signatory states to a treaty. So what they say is that I am giving you an offer to arbitrate, and who am I giving this to? To nationals of the other signatories. And that, as like classic contractual notions, the offer has to be perfected by acceptance, and the acceptance will have to be performed by the potential disputant, individual disputant who is a national of the other contracting state. And there may be specific regulations, there may be specific requirements about how to perfect that acceptance, but simply by launching or initiating arbitration proceedings, you are demonstrating your acceptance. So there's an offer to arbitrate from both parties, both signing states, and it is accepted by initiating arbitration proceedings by a national of the other state. Now it's interesting because who the disputants are is not manifest at the time the countries sign the treaties with each other. Basically, it is a hypothetical offer which is standing. It's not a hypothetical offer; it is a standing offer, and it will be perfected by a hypothetical entity in the future. By hypothetical, I do not mean that it is, unarticulated. What I mean is that it is unidentified as of now, right? So this is the difference, basically. And this has also been the bane of investment law's legitimacy crisis, because this is what publics are now, backlashing against.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. So this is a classic example, the kind of the contents you're speaking about right now. I think I have just come to my third question as compared to the questionnaire. But then if someone hears your content all through, so I think you have basically covered all the questions which at least we had planned for. So I think this is the basic example of what experience
Right. No, just one more thing, and this that I wanted to say, and you asked this question already, about what the chances are of a legal petition in India pursuing this. The thing is, this I'm saying because I'm old and I've been around for a while, so I've seen many of the land. So trade, international trade, even as a practice area, is there in some specialized law firms, increasingly so in India. International investment law, however, is not typically a practice area in most domestic Indian law firms. Now, if you want to practice this, and like I said, even arbitrations are, being participated in by international law firms, some of which have dedicated teams to deal with, treaties and treaty-based disputes. So, India has not matured to that level of ecosystem because the government, although the Indian government is being sued pretty often these days, has not reached that stage where, it's outsourced out, like, representing the government in these investor-state disputes. If such an environment did exist in the future, then even law firms, because they are basically relying on classic economics, like, okay, is there a demand? Otherwise, what is the point of having a dedicated team for investment disputes? We will just, allocate some lawyers from our trade team if in when the government appoints us as their council. So typically only few hand-picked council are chosen by the Indian government to represent India, for example, in the Vodafone dispute that happened with before the Permanent Court of Arbitration, or some dedicated law firms, only some of which are handpicked by the government. So unless it is made more democratic and large scale, international investment lawyers perhaps might get frustrated working in India itself. They have to perhaps look offshore. Yeah.
So, sir, one of the last questions I have for the interview is that what would be your suggestions to private practitioners or young students who have just come out of the blocks of studying international investment law? Should we search for tribunal secretary roles in the bodies like ICSID, UNCITRAL, or should we come back to India, or you start working on domestic commercial arbitration law and wait for our country or some legal practitioners to bring up international investment in India?
So both options sound, logically sound to me. Depends on where your inclinations lie at a given point of time. Waiting and watching is always a good idea. And international commercial arbitration gives you the same kind of expertise, okay? Because the legal infrastructure is much the same. And if you are proficient in international commercial arbitration, even domestic commercial arbitration for that matter, you will be well equipped to deal with these matters. A lot of arbitrators and legal practitioners who deal with both are dealing with both ISDS, that is investor state, and international commercial arbitration, right? So there's not much of a difference. The other thing, those who have the chance to, the opportunity to, the drive to, the financial resources to, the stage in life to do that, they perhaps would be doing well to explore international options as well. If nothing else, even if they come back to India later, they can gather experience and draw from that experience and bring it here. And the third, slightly creative and drastic option is that, we should look to create the environment ourselves, because India will be sued, because India is an emerging economy, obviously, and it can only grow further and further. And India, therefore, will also be sued. With great power comes great liability.
Exactly.
So India will be sued many times in the future. So why don't we create a system why don't we create a law firm of our own in the future, which is dedicated for international investment disputes? And we can represent anybody. We can represent other sovereign states as well. We can represent multinational corporations as well in the future, some of which are perhaps investing in India. It will not be anti-national as such, because the idea is to give fair representation. And even a country is better governed and better regulated if its lawyers keep its policies in check. So it augurs better for India that India does not take such measures which are detrimental to investors, because we need foreign investment for our economy to grow, right? In the end, of course, it needs to be balanced, but you know what I mean, right?
Exactly. Yes.
Over to you, Amar.
Sure. So, sir, I think we've covered mostly all the questions which I had for you in my questionnaire. And I've taken huge inspiration from you. And this video is gonna be circulated in numerous social medias and our website. And I hope we have the same permission from you. Because
thank you, and you've been thank you for your kind words. I'm sure this is a very flattering introduction that you provided for me. But thanks so much. And it was a pleasure talking to you, also because you are a practitioner yourself, and you know about the subject matter in as much detail as most other people here.
Exactly. So, sir, thanks for your time today, and I apologize for the initial hiccup that we had. And we hope to bring you back in our panel super soon in future to discuss more on international investment law. And probably we are even planning to have a caucus session where of few students from Jindal and few students from other private universities in India, they all engage in a simultaneous discussion where we have you as the main panelist and we have other students as participants raising question answers. So I think
I would love to.
We're planning that very soon, and we'll be in touch with you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Amar.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks a lot. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah. You too. Bye-bye.